If there were a man who did not have use of one of his arms, and you told him it would cost a lot of money and he could buy back that use, he'd give him every dime he had, I believe. That's my feeling. And in a sense, maybe this is what I'm doing. I don't know. Yeah, I've got a lot of years to live after baseball, and I would like to live them with complete use of my body.
He knew Sandy Koufax was destroying his own arm every time he stepped onto the mound. Don Drysdale knew it before the fans did. He knew it before the writers did. He knew it while the whole world was busy cheering for the most dominant pitcher anyone had ever seen. From the outside, Koufax looked untouchable. Between 1961 and 1966, he won 3 Cy Young Awards and a Most Valuable Player award. Hitters walked back to the dugout shaking their heads. Fans filled the stands just to watch him throw. Reporters ran out of new ways to praise him. And if stories about icons like Koufax deserve more attention, use the hype feature and give this video some hype as we uncover what Drysdale saw behind the scenes. Because Drysdale was not watching from the stands. He was standing right next to Koufax, in the same clubhouse, on the same team, sharing the same battles every single season. He saw what happened after the cheering stopped. He saw the part of the story that never made it into the headlines. What Drysdale saw was not weakness. It was not someone looking for pity. It was one of the toughest men in baseball choosing to keep going, start after start, no matter what it cost him. Fans saw the strikeouts. They saw the shutouts. They saw a pitcher who looked like he could never be beaten. Drysdale saw the price that was being paid for all of it, and he never forgot it. This is the story fans never fully understood. It is the story of a friendship built on respect, of 2 men who trusted each other completely, and of a truth that only one of them could see up close. Don Drysdale watched his friend chase greatness while his body slowly broke down underneath him, and he understood something the rest of the world would not understand until it was too late. He understood why Koufax pushed through pain that would have stopped most men. He understood why Koufax never cared much about personal records. He understood why the 2 of them stood together when nobody else in baseball would. And most of all, he understood why Koufax walked away from the game at the very top, when everyone else thought he still had years left to give. This story begins with the image everyone remembers. A left-handed pitcher, calm and quiet, standing on the mound like nothing in the world could rattle him. That image was real. Koufax truly was that dominant. But it was only half the story, and Drysdale knew the other half better than anyone alive. To understand why Drysdale's view of Koufax mattered so much, it helps to remember what kind of teammate he was. Drysdale was not a quiet observer standing on the edge of the team. He was a star pitcher himself, trusted by his manager, respected by hitters across the league, and relied on every single time he took the ball. He was not the type of man who handed out praise easily. He competed hard. He expected toughness from everyone around him, and he did not make excuses for himself or anyone else. That is exactly why his view of Koufax carries so much weight. When a man like that says his teammate was pitching through something most people could not imagine, it means something. It is not a rumor. It is not a guess. It is the word of a man who was there, day after day, season after season, watching the whole thing happen up close. The fans who packed the stadiums did not see any of that. They saw a pitcher who never seemed to get tired, never seemed to get rattled, and never seemed to lose his composure. They saw a calm face on the mound and a fastball that exploded past hitters. They saw win after win piling up, and they assumed the man throwing those pitches was simply blessed with a gift that came easily. That assumption was wrong, and Drysdale knew it was wrong before almost anyone else did. He watched a friend push his own body past reasonable limits, over and over, because the team needed him, and because he refused to let anyone down. That is the story this video is going to tell. Not the story of a pitcher who never struggled, but the story of a pitcher who struggled every single day and still chose to compete anyway, with his closest friend watching quietly and understanding exactly what it cost him. Behind closed doors, away from the cameras and the crowds, Koufax carried a pain that most fans never knew existed. He suffered from chronic arthritis in his left elbow, the same arm that made him one of the most feared pitchers in the game. That kind of pain does not come and go. It does not take a night off. It stays with a person, quietly, in every motion of daily life, and it grows worse with every hard throw. For Koufax, that meant every single start came with a cost that had nothing to do with the scoreboard. After games, while fans were celebrating in the stands or heading home happy, Koufax was often somewhere else entirely, sitting quietly with his arms soaking in a tub of ice for hours at a time. That was not a small habit. That was a routine built out of necessity, a ritual he repeated again and again, just to keep his body able to compete the next time he was needed. He also relied on medication simply to be able to take the mound at all. The specifics of what he took are not the point. The point is what it represents. A pitcher who looked so smooth and so effortless on television needed real medical help just to get through a normal turn in the rotation. Drysdale saw all of this up close, in a way that fans never could. He later explained that people simply did not understand how much pain Koufax went through every time he pitched. That single idea says everything about the gap between the public image and the private reality. The public saw a legend. Drysdale saw a man in real pain, showing up anyway, start after start, because his team needed him, and because that is who he was. Think about what that means for a moment. Every strikeout that thrilled a crowd came from an arm that was hurting. Every shutout that made headlines came after a night of soaking in ice just to be ready again. Every award Koufax collected sat next to a private routine of pain management that the public rarely saw and almost never fully understood. The applause was real, the dominance was real, but so was the suffering underneath it. And Drysdale never lost sight of that truth, even while the rest of the baseball world was busy marveling at the numbers. This is not a story about weakness. It is the opposite. It takes a certain kind of toughness to walk onto a mound in front of thousands of people, knowing your own arm is fighting you the entire time, and still perform like nothing is wrong. Koufax did that again and again, season after season. Drysdale understood exactly what that kind of toughness required, because he stood beside his friend and watched him do it. Fans clapped for the strikeouts. Drysdale respected the will it took just to show up. There is also something important in the fact that Koufax rarely spoke about any of this publicly. He was not chasing sympathy. He was not looking for credit for playing through pain. He simply did his job, quietly, and let the results speak on their own. That kind of silence can be easy to mistake for ease, as if nothing was actually hard for him. Drysdale knew better. He knew that behind the calm face on the mound was a man managing real physical damage almost every single day of the season, and choosing, over and over, to compete anyway. That contrast is really the heart of this whole story. On one side, there was the public version of Sandy Koufax. Cheers after every strikeout, newspaper headlines calling him unstoppable, awards piling up year after year. On the other side, there was the private version that only a few people ever truly saw. Hours spent treating a damaged arm, pain that never fully went away, a body that was quietly breaking down while the wins kept coming. Most fans only ever saw one side of that picture. Don Drysdale saw both, and he never confused the two. He knew that the cheering crowd and the aching arm belonged to the very same man, and he respected Koufax more because of it, not less. There is another part of this story that says just as much about who Koufax really was. Unlike a lot of star athletes, Koufax rarely chased personal records. He was not the kind of pitcher who kept one eye on the stat sheet while the game was happening. Drysdale admired that about him. He watched his teammate focus entirely on one thing, helping the Dodgers win, even while his own body was slowly breaking down underneath him. That is not a small detail. It says a great deal about a man's priorities when he is willing to sacrifice long-term comfort for something bigger than his own name in a record book. Plenty of players in that era cared deeply about personal numbers. Strikeout totals, win totals, awards, all of it mattered to a lot of great athletes, and there is nothing wrong with that. But Koufax was built differently. Winning as a team mattered more to him than padding his own resume. That does not mean he never cared about his own performance. Of course he did. Every competitor wants to succeed. But when it came down to a choice between chasing another personal milestone and doing whatever the team needed, Koufax chose the team almost every time. Drysdale saw that pattern again and again, and it shaped how he understood his friend. This mindset connects directly back to the physical pain Koufax was dealing with. A pitcher who only cared about his own statistics might have found ways to protect himself, to skip a tough start here or there, to manage his workload with his own legacy in mind. Koufax did not operate that way. He took the ball when the team needed him, arthritis and all, because winning together mattered more to him than looking after his own personal totals. That is a kind of selflessness that is easy to talk about and much harder to actually live out, especially when your own body is working against you every single day. Drysdale respected this because he shared the same competitive mentality. The two of them were not friends simply because they played on the same team. They were friends because they understood each other in a deeper way. Both men hated losing. Both men were willing to sacrifice their own comfort for a win. That shared mindset is part of what made their friendship so strong, and it is part of what allowed Drysdale to see Koufax so clearly, without the distortion that fame and headlines can sometimes create between people. That shared competitive spirit did not stay confined to the field. It carried over into other parts of their careers as well, including moments when the two of them had to stand up for themselves off the diamond. Their friendship was not just about celebrating wins together. It was also about trusting each other enough to face difficult moments as a team, even when those moments had nothing to do with pitching. That trust would soon be tested in a very public way. when both men decided that if the team was going to ask everything of their bodies, they were going to ask for something fair in return. It would be easy to tell this story as if Koufax simply endured his pain quietly and never pushed back against anything. That would not be accurate, and it would not be fair to either man. Koufax was tough, but he was not passive. He believed in fairness, and so did Drysdale. Neither man was interested in complaining without doing something about it. That combination, quiet toughness paired with a willingness to stand up when something truly mattered, is what set the stage for one of the most important moments of their careers together. Before the 1966 season, Koufax and Drysdale did something that shocked the entire sport. They jointly refused to report to spring training until they received better contracts. Neither man showed up when camp opened. Neither man backed down. It was one of the first high-profile holdouts in baseball history, and nobody quite knew what to make of it at the time. Two of the game's best pitchers, standing together, refusing to play until they were treated fairly. That kind of unity between players was almost unheard of, and it caught the entire league off guard. The reaction was not gentle. Some owners and members of the media accused the two players of being greedy. Newspapers ran stories questioning why two men already earning good money would risk an entire season over a contract dispute. That criticism stung, but it did not change their resolve. Others in the sport saw it differently. They viewed the holdout as an early challenge to baseball's restrictive labor system, a system that had long given players very little power over their own careers. Both of those reactions existed at the same time, and both are part of the real story. It would be easy, looking back, to focus only on the money involved. But that misses the deeper point. This was never really about greed. It was about two men who had given everything to their team, physically and competitively, deciding that they deserved to be treated with basic fairness in return. Koufax was not just asking for a bigger number on a piece of paper. He was standing up for the idea that a player who sacrifices his body for the team should not simply be taken for granted. For Drysdale, standing beside Koufax during that holdout was not a difficult decision. It was an extension of everything their friendship had already been built on. They trusted each other on the mound, they trusted each other in the clubhouse, and now they trusted each other with something far more personal, their own financial futures and their own standing within the sport. Walking away from spring training together took real courage. There was no guarantee it would work. There was no guarantee the team would eventually give in. Both men risked their reputations, and possibly their careers, by taking that stand together. Given everything Koufax had already sacrificed physically for the Dodgers, it is easy to understand why the holdout carried extra weight for him. A man who had already spent years pitching through arthritis, ice baths, and constant discomfort had every reason to want some security in return. The research does not say that his physical pain was the stated reason behind the holdout, and it would be unfair to claim that it was. But it is not hard to imagine that a man who understood just how fragile a pitching career truly could be would also understand the importance of standing up for himself while he still had the chance. Eventually, the standoff ended, and both men returned to the team. But something had changed. The holdout showed the rest of baseball that players could stand together and make their voices heard, even inside a system that was designed to keep them separated and easy to control. Koufax and Drysdale did not set out to become symbols of anything larger. They simply wanted to be treated fairly after everything they had given to their team. Still, the fact that they stood together, at real personal risk, says a great deal about the kind of men they were and about the trust that ran between them. Drysdale never forgot what that experience revealed about his friend. Koufax was not just a brilliant pitcher who happened to be quiet and reserved. He was a man willing to take a real risk for something he believed was right, even while his own body was already under enormous strain. That kind of quiet courage rarely made headlines the way a no-hitter did, but Drysdale saw it clearly, and it only deepened the respect he already had for his friend. Once the contract dispute was settled, life on the field went back to normal, at least on the surface. Koufax kept pitching. He kept winning. He kept putting up the kind of numbers that made him look invincible to anyone watching from a distance. But Drysdale knew that nothing about the underlying situation had actually changed. His friend was still pitching through the same arthritis, the same swelling, the same nightly routine of soaking his arm in ice just to be ready for the next start. A better contract could not fix a damaged elbow. It could not undo years of wear and tear on a joint that had already taken far more punishment than it was ever built to handle. That is what made the seasons following the holdout so remarkable, and also so quietly worrying for the people closest to Koufax. He kept performing at the highest level in the sport, Even as the physical cost kept climbing, doctors repeatedly warned him that continuing to pitch risked permanent damage to his arm. This was not a vague concern raised once and forgotten. It was a real, repeated warning from medical professionals who understood exactly what kind of damage was building up inside his elbow with every single pitch he threw. Koufax understood the risk. He was not naive about what he was doing to his own body. He knew, better than almost anyone, exactly what the doctors were telling him, and he knew what continuing to pitch might eventually cost him. He chose to keep competing anyway. That decision deserves to be understood carefully. This was not recklessness. This was not a man ignoring clear danger out of stubbornness or ego. This was a competitor who understood the stakes completely and decided, with open eyes, that helping his team win was worth the risk he was choosing to take. It helps to picture what that must have felt like, season after season. Imagine knowing every time you walked out to the mound that the very act of pitching was slowly and permanently damaging your body. Imagine hearing that warning from a doctor, not once, but again and again, and choosing to take the ball anyway because your team needed you. That is the reality Koufax lived with during his most dominant years. While the public was marveling at his strikeout totals and his spotless earned run average, he was quietly carrying the knowledge that any one of those outings could be the one that finally pushed his arm past the point of no return. During this same period, Koufax won 3 Cy Young Awards and a Most Valuable Player award, numbers that placed him among the greatest pitchers the sport had ever seen. Those achievements were real, and they deserved every bit of the praise they received. But it is important to hold two truths at the same time. Koufax was building one of the greatest careers in baseball history, and at the very same time, he was facing the very real possibility that continuing to pitch could permanently damage his arm. Both of those things were true at once, every single season, and Drysdale understood that better than anyone watching from outside the clubhouse. For most fans, every new season was simply another chance to watch greatness continue. They assumed Koufax would keep pitching for years to come, adding more wins, more strikeouts, and more awards to an already remarkable career. There was no obvious reason to think otherwise. He was still overpowering hitters. He was still one of the best pitchers anyone had ever watched. From the stands, it looked like the good times would simply keep rolling on, season after season, with no end in sight. Drysdale did not see it that way. He was not watching a career on cruise control. He was watching a countdown, even if nobody had announced when the clock would run out. Every outing added another accomplishment to Koufax's legacy, but it also added another layer of wear to an arm that doctors had already warned could suffer permanent harm. The same performances that thrilled fans and filled highlight reels were, at the same time, quietly pushing Koufax closer to a decision that most people never saw coming. This is part of what makes the story so powerful. The public and Drysdale were technically watching the same games, the same pitches, the same outcomes. But they were not seeing the same story. Fans saw a legend building his case for the history books. Drysdale saw a friend making a private calculation with every single start, weighing what he owed his team against what continuing to pitch was costing his own body. Nobody forced Koufax to keep making that trade. He made that choice for himself again and again because that is who he was. It is worth pausing here to appreciate just how demanding that must have been, mentally as well as physically. It is one thing to compete through pain during a single difficult stretch. It is another thing entirely to do it consistently, for years, while performing at a level that made you the best pitcher in the entire sport. Koufax did not simply survive through his pain, he thrived through it, in front of enormous crowds, under enormous pressure, with very little room for anyone to notice what he was actually dealing with behind the scenes. Drysdale carried that knowledge quietly. He was not the type to broadcast his friends' private struggles to reporters or fans. He respected Koufax too much for that. But he carried the weight of understanding, watching someone he cared about make a sacrifice that most people would never fully appreciate. That understanding shaped how Drysdale viewed every single one of Koufax's achievements during those years. He never saw them as easy. He never took them for granted. He knew exactly what each one of them had cost. As the seasons went on, the warnings from doctors did not go away. If anything, they likely grew more serious, given everything that was already known about the state of Koufax's elbow. Yet Koufax kept taking the ball. He kept showing up. He kept delivering, start after start, in a way that made him look almost superhuman to anyone who did not know the full story. Drysdale knew the full story, and it made him respect his friend even more with every season that passed. There is a certain kind of quiet heroism in choosing to keep going when you know exactly what it might cost you. Koufax was not chasing glory for its own sake. He was not ignoring the warnings out of arrogance. He understood the risk completely, and he decided, deliberately, that his team was worth that risk. Drysdale watched that decision play out season after season, and it became one of the defining truths he carried about his friend, long after the headlines had faded and the box scores had been forgotten. None of this diminishes what Koufax accomplished on the mound. If anything, it makes those accomplishments harder to measure by ordinary standards. It is one thing to be talented. Plenty of pitchers have arms capable of overpowering hitters for a season or two. It is another thing entirely to sustain that level of excellence year after year while managing a physical condition that doctors themselves considered dangerous. Koufax did both. He was talented enough to dominate the league and disciplined enough to keep showing up, despite pain that would have ended most careers far earlier. Fans often talk about pressure in terms of a big game, a tight inning, or a crucial pitch late in a close contest. Koufax faced a different kind of pressure that had nothing to do with the scoreboard. Every time he walked to the mound, he was making a private choice to risk further damage to his own body for the sake of his team. That kind of pressure never showed up in a box score, and it rarely made it into a newspaper story. It lived quietly inside Koufax, and inside the small circle of people, like Drysdale, who understood exactly what he was carrying. By the middle of the 1966 season, that quiet pressure had been building for years. The ice baths were still part of the routine, the arthritis had not gone away, the medication that allowed him to take the mound was still a necessary part of his preparation before nearly every start. None of that had changed. What had changed was how much longer Koufax was willing to keep making that trade. Drysdale did not know exactly when the decision would come, but he understood that a moment like that was somewhere on the horizon. A man cannot manage that level of physical strain forever, no matter how much willpower he has, and no matter how much his team depends on him. Even so, nothing about Koufax's performance on the field suggested any kind of decline. He was still overpowering hitters. He was still delivering complete games when his team needed them most. To anyone watching from the outside, there was no obvious sign that anything was about to change. That is exactly why what happened next stunned so many people who had only ever seen the public version of Sandy Koufax, the version who never seemed to slow down. After the 1966 season ended, Koufax made an announcement that shocked all of baseball. He was retiring, at only 30 years old, while still standing at the very top of his sport. Many fans could not believe it. He was coming off another dominant season. There was no obvious reason, from the outside, why he would walk away now. Plenty of people believed he still had several more dominant years left in him, more records within reach, more championships still to chase. To the public, this looked like a player leaving money and glory on the table for no clear reason at all. Drysdale did not react with the same confusion. He understood exactly why his friend was walking away, because he had been watching the toll pitching had taken on Koufax for years. The pain had become unbearable. The arthritis that had shaped so much of Koufax's routine, the ice baths, the medication, the constant management just to be able to compete, had reached a point where continuing to pitch threatened something far more important than a few more wins. Koufax chose the ability to live a normal life over the chance to chase more records. That is not a small trade to make. For a competitor who cared as much about winning as Koufax did, walking away from the game meant giving up the very thing that had defined him for years. This decision fits perfectly with everything Drysdale already knew about his friend. Koufax had never chased personal statistics for their own sake. He had always cared more about winning than about padding his own legacy. Retiring at the height of his abilities was, in a strange way, consistent with that same mindset. He was not staying in the game to chase one more milestone or one more headline. He was making a clear-eyed decision about what mattered most to him, even if it meant giving up the chance to add more records to an already remarkable career. It would be easy to view this retirement as some kind of defeat, as if pain had finally beaten him and forced him out of the game he loved. That framing misses the point entirely. This was not surrender. This was discipline. This was a man who understood his own limits better than anyone else could, making a difficult and courageous choice at exactly the right moment, rather than waiting until his body made the decision for him in a far more painful way. Koufax did not need to keep pushing his body past reasonable limits to prove anything more to anyone. He had already shown, season after season, exactly what he was capable of and exactly how much he was willing to sacrifice for his team. Walking away at 30 did not diminish that legacy. If anything, it protected it, allowing him to leave the game on his own terms, with his body still able to give him a normal life outside of baseball. Drysdale understood what Koufax had already given up, even while most fans were still struggling to make sense of the decision. He had watched the ice baths. He had watched the careful preparation before every start. He had watched his friend manage constant discomfort just to keep competing at the highest level. When the retirement finally came, it did not feel sudden to Drysdale the way it felt to the rest of the baseball world. It felt like the natural conclusion of everything he had already seen coming for years. There is something deeply admirable about a person who knows when to stop, especially when everyone around them is telling them to keep going. Koufax had every incentive to stay. Fans wanted more. The team wanted more. His own competitive nature surely wanted more. Yet he chose to listen to his body and to his own sense of what mattered, rather than chase one more season simply because the world expected it of him. That kind of self-awareness is rare in any walk of life, and it is especially rare among elite athletes at the very peak of their powers. Looking back, the retirement stands as one of the clearest examples of who Sandy Koufax really was. He was not defined only by strikeouts or championships or awards. He was defined by the choices he made when nobody was forcing his hand. Choices that consistently put winning, fairness, and his own long-term well-being ahead of chasing more personal glory. Drysdale had watched those choices unfold for years, and by the time the retirement came, it only confirmed what he had believed about his friend all along. Drysdale's own career eventually followed a path that was not so different, even if it did not happen in quite the same way. His career was also shortened by arm problems, though his ending was not as abrupt as Koufax's had been. There was no single dramatic announcement that shocked the sport overnight. Instead, Drysdale's body wore down more gradually, until pitching at the level he expected of himself was no longer possible. In its own way, that slower decline gave Drysdale an even deeper understanding of what his friend had gone through. He knew, from first-hand experience, what it meant for a pitcher's body to simply stop cooperating, no matter how much heart or determination a person still had left. That shared experience only strengthened the bond between the two men. Drysdale was not simply someone who had observed Koufax's pain from a safe distance. He had lived through his own version of the same struggle, watching his own arm betray him after years of hard competition. He understood on a personal level how difficult it is to accept that a career built on physical skill cannot simply be willed to continue forever. That understanding gave his view of Koufax's story even more weight and even more credibility. After his playing career ended, Drysdale successfully moved into broadcasting, finding a new way to stay close to the game he loved. He brought the same intelligence and competitive insight to the broadcast booth that he had once brought to the mound, and he became a respected voice for fans who wanted to understand the sport more deeply. It seemed, for a while, like a fitting second chapter for a man who had given so much to baseball as a player. Later in life, Drysdale faced serious health problems of his own, including complications from heart disease. On July 3, 1993, he died suddenly of a heart attack. He was only 56 years old. His death shocked the baseball world, arriving without warning, much the same way his friend's retirement decades earlier had once caught fans completely off guard. There is no suggestion that his heart condition was connected to his years on the pitching mound. That connection is not part of this story, and it should not be assumed. What matters here is simpler and more human. A man who had spent his career studying sacrifice, physical limits, and the fragile nature of an athlete's body ended up facing his own reminder of just how quickly life can change. In some ways, Drysdale's own journey adds an extra layer of meaning to everything he understood about Koufax. He was not simply a witness standing outside his friend's struggle, offering sympathy from a safe distance. He had lived through pain, physical decline, and the difficult process of moving on from the game that had defined him. That shared experience is part of what made his insight into Koufax so valuable. He was not guessing at what his friend went through. He knew it, in his own body, in his own career, and in his own life. That is part of what makes Drysdale's understanding of Koufax so meaningful. It did not come from a distance. It came from two men who spent years side by side, competing together, sacrificing together, and eventually facing the limits of their own bodies in different but connected ways. One man's career ended abruptly at the height of his powers through a deliberate and courageous choice. The other man's career faded more slowly through the same kind of physical wear that never fully lets go of an athlete who gives everything to the game. Both stories, taken together, say something powerful about the true cost of greatness in a sport that often only celebrates the highlights and rarely pauses to consider what those highlights actually required. In the end, Don Drysdale was right about Sandy Koufax. He understood that the greatness fans celebrated came with a private cost that most people never fully saw. He understood that Koufax cared more about helping his team win than about chasing personal records for their own sake. He understood why the two of them stood together and risked everything during their contract holdout, insisting on being treated fairly after everything they had already given the game. And he understood, better than anyone else in baseball, exactly why his friend chose to walk away at the very peak of his abilities, rather than keep chasing glory at a cost that was no longer worth paying. None of this takes anything away from Koufax's accomplishments. If anything, it adds to them. A pitcher who dominates while healthy is impressive. A pitcher who dominates while quietly managing real pain, real risk, and real sacrifice, season after season, is something closer to remarkable. Drysdale saw that difference clearly because he lived close enough to the truth to recognize it. He never needed headlines to confirm what he already knew about his friend. Koufax's decision to retire at 30 was not weakness, and it was never a failure. It was one final act of the same discipline and selflessness that had defined his entire career. He gave everything he had to the game, on his own terms, for exactly as long as he was willing to pay the price it demanded. When that price became too high, he had the clarity and the courage to walk away, choosing his own future over one more season of applause. Drysdale carried the full truth of that story for the rest of his life, long after both men had left the game behind. He never needed to correct the public record or argue with anyone about it. He simply knew, quietly and completely, that his friend's toughness was real, that his sacrifice was real, and that his greatness meant even more once you understood the whole picture. He understood the pain behind the poise. He understood the sacrifice behind the statistics. He understood the friendship that made two proud competitors stand together when it mattered most. Fans loved Sandy Koufax for what they could see on the mound, the strikeouts, the shutouts, and the calm confidence he carried into every single game. Don Drysdale respected him for everything he could not see, the quiet cost paid behind every one of those unforgettable performances. The world remembered how great Sandy Koufax looked, but Don Drysdale remembered what that greatness cost.